I have been volunteering with food redistribution projects for going on 11 years now. Community fridges, surplus collections, church hall pantries, the kind of work that gets a half column in a local paper if you are lucky and mostly gets done by the same 12 people every single week, while everyone else means to get involved and never quite does. In all that time, across every drafty hall and every argument with a supermarket logistics coordinator about what counts as still good, I never thought I would be standing next to a chest freezer that someone had decorated with felt-tip sunflowers, watching a 6-year-old boy in a partially untucked white shirt crouch down in front of a woman named Margaret and say, with complete and total seriousness, "But where do you eat it? Do you eat it here or do you take it home?" That is where I want to start. Not with the arrival, not with the photographs, but with that question. Because that is the moment I stopped thinking about what this day was supposed to be and started paying attention to what it actually was. My name does not matter for this. People at the hall call me Ro, short for something longer that nobody uses. That will do. The morning had started the way these mornings usually start, which is to say badly and then fine. I had missed my bus from SLU by approximately 40 seconds, watched it pull away from the stop with the particular cruelty of a bus that has seen you running and chosen not to care, and arrived at St. Andrew's Hall 23 minutes later than I had planned, with my clipboard tucked under my arm and my good intentions slightly damp from the drizzle. My jacket, the green one I have had since approximately the second Blair government, was starting to go at the left elbow. I had meant to patch it. I had been meaning to patch it for 2 winters. Our coordinator, a woman named Sylvia who runs the Windsor Food Network and has the energy of someone who has never once in her life missed a bus, had called me the night before with specific instructions. Be there by 9. Help set up. Talk to the press if they need background quotes, but do not, under any circumstances, try to be in any photographs. The family had asked for something low-key. A working visit, not a walkabout. Sylvia had said the words low-key 4 times in a single phone call, which told me she was more nervous than she was letting on. The family, in this context, meant the Princess of Wales and her youngest son. That was how Sylvia referred to them throughout the call. The family, as if giving them names would make it more complicated than it needed to be. I want to say that I arrived with an open mind. I want to say that, but it would not be entirely honest. I have been doing this work long enough to have seen the other version of these visits. The ones where someone important comes for 45 minutes, holds a tin of beans for a photograph, says something warm and general about community spirit, and leaves before the actual work begins. I have smiled through those visits. I have been grateful for the coverage they generate. And I have gone home afterwards and felt something small and tired that I do not have a precise name for, something in the vicinity of having been useful as a backdrop. I was, in short, expecting a backdrop morning. I was wrong. St. Andrew's Hall sits on a side street just off the main road, the kind of building that has been doing quiet, unglamorous work for about 100 years and looks exactly like it. The brickwork is Victorian. The guttering is modern and slightly mismatched. Inside, the floor is that particular shade of worn wooden parquet that exists in every church hall in England, and the strip lighting hums at a frequency that makes long meetings feel slightly longer than they are. The community fridge itself was installed 8 months ago by a coalition of 3 local charities and one very determined retired headteacher named Vera, who had read about the Huddersfield model and decided Windsor needed one. It is not, I should say, a beautiful object. It is 2 large upright fridges and a chest freezer, all second-hand, positioned along the back wall of the hall beneath a hand-painted banner that reads, "Take what you need. Leave what you can," in letters that start confidently large and get progressively smaller toward the right edge, suggesting the painter ran out of wall slightly sooner than expected. The felt-tip sunflowers I mentioned had been added by the Thursday morning children's group and covered approximately 60% of the chest freezer's surface. Someone had also added a felt-tip bee. The bee had a small crown, Nobody I asked knew whose idea that was. By the time I arrived, Sylvia was already there, rearranging a table of leaflets that was already perfectly arranged. Beside her was a man I did not recognize at first, mid-40s, wearing a lanyard and an expression that suggested he was calculating the exit routes. His name, I learned later, was Graham. He was from the Borough Council's Community Liaison Office, and he had arrived. Sylvia told me quietly while he was looking at his phone with a folder. Folders, in my experience, are rarely good news. Vera was there too, of course. She had been there since 7:30. She was 81 years old and moved through the hall with the unhurried authority of someone who has outlasted every inconvenience the 20th century produced and expects the 21st to be no different. She was checking the temperature gauges on the fridges and writing the readings in a small logbook in handwriting so precise it looked typeset. The other two volunteers were a young man named Cillian, perhaps 22, studying environmental science at Reading and doing his placement hours with us, and a woman in her 60s named Pat who had been coming every Saturday for 3 years without ever being asked to and without ever explaining why, which meant she was either a saint or had something to prove, and either way the tins got sorted. We were all making small talk about the drizzle and whether it would clear by noon when the door opened. There was, as Sylvia had promised, no ceremony, no announcement, no advance person with an earpiece sweeping the room. The door opened and the Princess of Wales walked in, and beside her, holding her hand with the loose inattention of a child whose mind is already several steps ahead of his body, was a boy with dark hair and a white shirt that was, even at this early stage of the morning, making a preliminary effort to escape from his trousers. She said good morning. She thanked Sylvia before Sylvia could thank her. She introduced Louis, who said hello to the room with the brief, democratic sincerity of someone who has been taught that hellos matter and has decided to believe it. Then he looked past all of us at the fridges. And his face did the thing that faces do when they have found the most interesting object in a room and do not yet know the polite way to go and look at it. "Can I go and see?" he said to his mother, not to us. She said yes. He went. I want to describe what happened in the next hour carefully, because I have been turning it over in my mind for weeks now, and I am still not sure I have the right words for all of it. Louis did not tour the fridge. He inspected it. There is a difference. A tour is when you move through a space at a pace set by someone else, nodding at the things you are pointed toward. What Louis did was slower and more personal than that. He opened the fridge door and looked at the contents with the seriousness of a person taking inventory. He asked Vera what the numbers on the temperature gauge meant. When she told him, he nodded as if this was confirming something he had suspected. He picked up a tin of chopped tomatoes, turned it over, put it back. He asked why some things had stickers on them and others did not. Pat explained the color-coded date system we use. He listened. He asked a follow-up question. Cillian, who was supposed to be helping me set up the donation table, had stopped entirely and was just watching. The Princess of Wales moved through the hall speaking with Sylvia and Graham, and she had the quality that I noticed within the first few minutes and kept noticing, of paying complete attention to whoever was speaking to her. Not the performed attention of someone managing a schedule. The actual thing. When Sylvia was talking about the waiting list for the weekly shop-share scheme, the princess did not glance toward her son. She did not check her watch. She listened the way you listen, when the information is going into a place where it will actually be used. Graham, the council liaison, had positioned himself near the door with his folder and the expression of a man awaiting a suitable moment. I had been doing this long enough to recognize that expression. He had something in the folder that he needed to say, and he was trying to decide whether to say it before or after the photographs. I found out later from Sylvia what was in the folder. One formal complaint from a resident in the flats above the car park adjacent to the hall, citing noise from early morning deliveries. A note from the council's public health team requesting an updated food hygiene certification for the new chest freezer, which Vera had ordered but which had not yet arrived in the post, and a preliminary notice that the hall's use classification might need to be reviewed given the expanded operation, which was the kind of sentence that does not mean anything specific, but takes approximately 4 months to not mean anything specific during which time a great deal can quietly cease to operate. None of this was malicious. That is important to say. Graham was not a villain. He was a man with a folder full of legitimate procedural concerns and absolutely no feel for the room he was standing in. Louis, by this point, had found Margaret. Margaret is 74. She has lived in Windsor for 51 years. She comes to the community fridge every Saturday morning, has done since it opened, and she always arrives at 9:15 and always takes the same things. Whatever bread is available, a tin of something with protein, and one treat which she says firmly is allowed. She has never told any of us much about her situation. She does not need to. We do not ask. That is the arrangement, and it is a dignified one, and everyone at the hall understands it without it ever being stated. Louis did not understand the arrangement because nobody had explained it to him, because he was 6 years old and the concept of dignified arrangements was not yet part of his working vocabulary. He crouched down in front of her. She was sitting in one of the plastic chairs along the side wall, going through her bag for her reusable tote, and he said, with no preamble and no agenda whatsoever, "But where do you eat it? Do you eat it here or do you take it home?" Margaret looked at him. I think she needed a moment to recalibrate, because she was expecting to be left alone, and instead she had a small person crouched at her eye level asking her a genuine question. "I take it home, love," she said. "Do you live far?" he asked. 10 minutes. He thought about this. "Do you walk or do you get a bus?" "I walk," she said. "I like the walk." He nodded slowly, as if this was all going into the same place where the temperature gauge information had gone. Then he said, "My granny walks everywhere too. She says it's the best way to see things." Margaret smiled. It was not the smile people give royalty. It was the smile people give a child who has just said something unexpectedly sensible. "She's right," Margaret said. "She is absolutely right about that." Louis stood up, apparently satisfied, and went back to examining the chest freezer. I had been standing 6 feet away pretending to sort a box of pasta. My clipboard was in my hand. I had not written anything on it in 40 minutes. The thing with Graham and the folder happened at about 11:30. The hall had filled up by then. Word had spread in the way that word spreads in small communities, not dramatically but steadily, and there were perhaps 20 people moving through, some of them regulars, some of them curious, a few of them local journalists Sylvia had briefed in advance. The photography was happening in the careful, unobtrusive way that had been agreed, no posed shots, no arranged moments, just a photographer moving quietly around the edges. Louis had, by this point, been recruited by Cillian to help apply the color-coded date stickers to a new donation of yogurts, a task he was performing with a concentration that suggested he understood the stakes. His shirt was now almost entirely untucked on the left side. The princess was speaking to a group of 3 women near the donation table when Graham approached her with the folder open. I was close enough to hear. He was apologetic in tone, thorough in detail. The complaint about the deliveries, the certification for the freezer, the use classification review. He was not unkind about it. He said he was sure it could all be resolved. It was just a matter of process. It would just require some time, and in the interim the operation might need to be scaled back slightly pending. Pending is a word that ends sentences without ending them. The princess listened. She asked one question about the certification timeline. She asked whether the complaint about deliveries had come from the tenant directly or through a managing agent. She was measured and specific, and Graham responded in kind. And they were having the kind of adult conversation about logistics and procedure that would eventually resolve itself into a committee and a subcommittee and a working group. and the fridge would probably survive all of it. But probably is not the same as definitely, and in the meantime Vera's logbook, and Pat's 3 years of Saturdays and Margaret's 10-minute walk would all be sitting in the pending column. Louis was not coloring at the side table. He had been taken to the side table, which is a different thing. I saw him leave it. He slid off the chair with the boneless ease of children at that age and walked across the hall and stood beside his mother and looked up at Graham. Graham looked down at him. There was a brief adjustment in Graham's face, the kind of adjustment people make when they suddenly remember there is an audience that changes the nature of what they are saying. "Hello," Graham said. "Hello," said Louis. Then he looked at the folder. "What's in there?" Graham looked at the princess. She did not rescue him. "It's some paperwork," Graham said, "about the fridge." "Is something wrong with it?" Louis asked. "Because the temperature is right, I checked." Graham said that no, the temperature was fine. It was more about some administrative questions. Louis looked at him for a moment with the particular patience of a child who does not yet know that administrative questions are supposed to be impressive. "But people need the food," he said. He said it the way you state a fact that you assume everyone already knows and are mildly surprised to find yourself clarifying. Not angry, not accusatory, just clear. Margaret takes hers home and she walks 10 minutes. If the fridge isn't here, she can't do that. The hall had not gone silent. That is not what happened. The conversations around us continued. The photographer moved to a different corner. Cillian finished his yogurts. But Graham had stopped talking. His folder was still open. He was looking at Louis with an expression that I have been trying to describe accurately ever since and keep failing to. It was not embarrassment, exactly. It was something more like the look on a person's face when they have been carrying a piece of furniture through a doorway at an angle that isn't quite working, and someone much smaller simply tilts it slightly, and it goes straight through. There was a pause that lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Then Graham closed the folder, not with any drama, just closed it the way you close something when you have decided it can wait. He looked at the princess. "I think," he said, "the certification is probably the easiest thing to resolve quickly. I'll make a note that the freezer's in active use and flag it as a priority with the health team. The use classification review I can defer while we gather more information. And regarding the delivery complaint, I'll contact the managing agent directly and see if we can agree on a time that works for everyone." He said this to the princess, but I do not think he was saying it to the princess. Kate stayed for another half hour after that. She helped Vera label the new shelf dividers that Cillian had cut from cardboard. She spoke for a long time with Pat, who I later found out had been coming to the fridge every Saturday because her own husband had used a scheme like this one during a period some years back, and she had never quite found a way to repay that except to be there. And the princess had listened to all of it without interrupting once. Louis spent the last part of the visit sitting on the floor beside the chest freezer with a piece of paper and a felt-tip pen that someone had given him, adding what appeared to be an additional B to the freezer's surface. Someone pointed out that there was already a B. Louis said this one was different. When asked how, he looked up and said this one was a worker bee, as if the distinction was self-evident, and went back to drawing. Before they left, the princess shook hands with everyone, including me, and thanked us in the specific way that means she knew what the work actually was and not just what it was called. Louis said goodbye to Margaret first, across the room, a full-arm wave, and Margaret waved back with her tote bag on her shoulder, and neither of them made anything of it. The shirt was, by the end, untucked on both sides and partially untucked at the back. It looked like it had been through something, which I suppose it had. Sylvia found me outside afterward, by the small car park where the donated goods are usually unloaded. I was standing with my clipboard, which still had almost nothing written on it. My jacket elbow was still going. The drizzle had cleared, technically, but left behind the kind of damp air that makes you not entirely sure it has. She said, "Well." I said, "Yes." She looked back at the hall for a moment. Through the window, we could see Vera closing up the fridges and Pat stacking the chairs with the automatic efficiency of someone who has stacked these particular chairs many times and has long since stopped thinking about it. "Graham rang me," Sylvia said, 10 minutes ago. "Certification is going to be fast-tracked. He's deferring the use review for 6 months minimum. He said he'd look into the delivery times personally." "Good," I said. "He also said," she stopped. She was smiling in the way people smile when they are not sure whether something is funny or important and have decided it might be both. "He said he thought the project had strong community roots." That was the phrase he used, strong community roots. I thought about Louie crouching in front of Margaret asking where she ate her food. I thought about the folder closing. "That's one way to put it," I said. She went back inside. I stayed by the car park for a while longer, no particular reason. The thing about days like this, in my experience, is that you arrive expecting to be a backdrop, and you leave having witnessed something. And the gap between those two things is not something you can fully explain to anyone who was not there. Not because it was extraordinary, because it was the opposite. Because a boy with an untucked shirt asked a woman where she ate her lunch, and asked a man with a folder what was wrong, and said what was true in the way that people say things when they have not yet learned that truth is supposed to be more complicated than it is. I have been volunteering for 11 years. I have seen important people hold tins of beans for photographs and leave before the work begins. I have smiled and been grateful and gone home feeling small and tired. I did not feel small and tired walking to the bus stop. My jacket still needed patching. The bus was, as it turned out, 4 minutes late, which is its own kind of grace. And the community fridge on Alma Road was still open, and Margaret was walking home. And somewhere on the side of a chest freezer in Windsor, there are now 2 bees, and one of them has a crown, and the other one is a worker. And if you asked Louis, I think he would tell you that the difference matters. I think he would be right.